Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia, and this is the... Oh, I forgot to change the dates. Frontline changes report and conclusions for the day of 933 for the 13th of September. It's going to be a pretty chill episode because I'm adding in the conclusions, and the frontline changes, there are quite a number, but they are not as significant, at least in my opinion. And I also didn't manage to do the conclusions 12 hours ago because I was burnt out. I was super burnt out. It was a very, very long day. So and I think I'm falling sick as well. No, overworked, I guess. So anyway, yeah, and there's some virus coming here and there. So yeah, it is what it is. So there's frontline changes over at Ryzivka, Tekino, Novi Put, Klishchievka, Selidove, Ukraine's Novohorodivka Vodiane, as well as Krinky. And so we go through the frontline changes first, then we'll talk about the current situation over in Ukraine, in the Ukraine war. So over at the Ukrainian counteroffensive, so counter offensive. So the Russians actually launched a counteroffensive in the Kursk region. So so Russian forces launched this major counter-offensive in the Kursk region on the western flank, and the Ukrainians reacted by doing their counter offensive over in this Glushkovo sector. So now the western flank is not the most western flank now. No, now it is a more extreme western flank in the Glushkovo region. And so the Ukrainians attacked in 3 different directions. So the main attack came at Novi Put, and the Ukrainian forces attacked Novi Put, and it seems like they have captured it, and they are now pushing towards Vasiloe. There is also attack over at Medvedje as well as Takino. So anyway, why am I doing the SIBREP? I need to do the frontline changes report. I forgot. Okay, frontline changes report. So the Ukrainian forces captured some buildings over in Takino. So this is mapped by the Russian side. So there is some attack here. We talk about the conclusions later. I forgot. I suddenly started to talk about analysis. So anyway, and then there's frontline changes over at Novi Put, and the geolocation of Ukrainian forces is just off Obukovka, and so this means that the Ukrainians managed to progress quite a bit, but it's not very far. It's just around 2 kilometers plus 2.5 kilometers from the border, which is actually quite far. But no, there is no, I'm not sure what the Russians are doing over there. So the next frontline change is over Klishchievka. Over Klishchievka, this is already mentioned in the situation report. Russian forces geolocated along the tree line, and in the conservative mapping, we do it this way on the western part of Klishchievka. The next frontline change is over at Selidove. At Selidove, Russian forces have been geolocated in the Dacha regions, which means that they have actually taken some grounds around Mikhailivka, moving towards Selidove. So just some small frontline change around here. And for those that feel like I'm zooming in too much or zooming out too much, you can actually look at this map. The mapping is public, is in the description below, so in case you are looking for it. And so the next frontline change is over Ukraine's. Russian forces geolocated to be attacking this fortified line on the west of Ukraine, so as they continue to try to do the flanking movement into the rear position of Ukraine. So that is currently happening. So that constitutes a frontline change. The next frontline change is over Novohorodivka. Oh, I arranged it wrongly, but anyway. So at Novohorodivka, and the Russian forces, based on the Ukrainian mapping. So I just want to highlight the Deep State UA's map report have not came out for the conclusion of the day. However, I go through the mapping, so I discovered some frontline changes that maybe they might not even talk about in their summaries. So Russian forces have actually taken the entire Gali region, this Little Valley region west of Novohorodivka, as it heads towards Lysivka. And by the look of it, based on the frontline change, it looks like the Russians have even entered into Lysivka itself already, given that some of the first buildings has been taken by the Russian forces. So this is actually a progression from Novohorodivka and continuing moving towards Pokrov. So Lisivka is like the settlement almost just before Pokrov. Novopalivka is in between, but Lisivka is like the last major settlement before reaching Pokrov. So this is actually pretty significant in that sense. So, and the next frontline change is over at Ukraine's. I mentioned already, sorry, Vodiane. So at Vodiane, the Ukrainian mapping has considered that the Russians have taken grounds south of Vodiane, and so this, which means that the Russians have fully, control over the entire highway region and the south of the Dacha. So this was previously still not acknowledged by the Ukrainian side, and also that the Russians also expanded some control, but this is pretty predictable because this is a salient. The Ukrainians can't defend there, so it is what it is. And the last frontline change is over at Krinky. So this is not an attack per se, but it is just when I go through the entire mapping of Deep State UA, because usually I don't go through the entire mapping. I just based on the reporting to see where they changed. But since the report is not out yet, so I've gone through the entire mapping and discovered that they actually draw the Russians have taken some grounds north of Krinky. And this came as a little bit of a surprise in the sense that this is a bit specific in terms of where the Russians have progressed. So interesting, but I don't think this is significant because I don't really cherish all these changes in the islands. I don't think it matters, and I think that it could be just go around it too easily. Like if the Russians, like for example, go across by another region, and some Ukrainian forces are in the islands, then there will be no more supplies. It falls automatically. So the islands are not exactly the best place to be. That's why I don't think it's strategically that important per se. So we can now proceed into the conclusion. That's all for the frontline changes report. Then going back to just now what we were mentioning about the counteroffensive, the counter offensive. The Ukrainians are attacking in 3 different directions, as mentioned just now, towards Vasiloy, and the Russian sources seems to say that Novi Put has been captured. They say that the Ukrainians pushed the Russians out of it, and there is also attack at Medvedje as well as towards Tekino. So I would say this attack comes really late. I have mentioned that the moment to attack is way before that. Somehow I'm not sure. Maybe there are some theories coming from the pro-Russian side, because there is this river, right? There is this river that is encircling the Grushkovo region, and all the bridges has been destroyed, and the Russians are using pontoon crossing to cross, and the Ukrainians have been trying to destroy them as soon as they are established, but so far not as successful. But I feel like the Ukrainians are like suspecting that if they have destroyed all the bridges and put some pressure, destroying all the pontoon crossings, the Russians may do a mass withdrawal from this region to save their forces, like they tend to believe that the Russians are doing, like in the Kherson region or even the Balaklia offensive where they just abandon the positions, or in the Kharkiv offensive where the Russians just gave up. After the Ukrainians, seems to capture a lot of grounds. Like they think that by creating strategic difficulties on the Russians will give up. Like I think that is the kind of perception that the Ukrainians have on the Russians, and this is also something that I've observed from a lot of pro-Ukrainian guys, particularly on Twitter, because I don't go to Reddit. So Reddit is like a censorship zone. They censor too much to the point where it's totally meaningless to be there. But on X, like when I look at I communicate with some pro-Ukrainian guys, they seem to have this I would say even unfair perception of what the Russians decision makings are. Like they seem to think that the Russians are so much more deficient in their capacity to plan and think and to plot. versus the Ukrainians. Although Ukrainians and the Russians are basically the same race, they are the same people. They are generally the same ethnic group. So it's a bit kind of a bizarre situation where like you would believe that no, the Russians are worse than the Ukrainians. I don't even think the Ukrainians are worse than the Russians. The only reason why I think that the Russians would eventually win the war is just purely because Russia is just a much bigger country with a much bigger population, and organizationally the government is more intact. Like we can also see it during the Wagner attempt at mutiny, which no one's joins them. The Russian country, the Russia generally is pretty united. Very unlike the situation in Ukraine, where they have they do struggle with mobilization. A lot of the population have actually escaped into the West, into Europe, taking pure advantage. The whole reason of why they wanted to join EU or NATO was because of the Schengen zone, right? To able to travel freely to the rest of Europe to work. And that's what they wanted. So having the Ukraine war, and then they have this special refugee status, they can also work. They get what they want immediately. So, and that is the sad thing about the Ukraine situation, is that the country generally isn't as united as what the Russians are, which is why that is the main problem with the Ukraine war effort. They are struggling because there just isn't that kind of unity or the sense of the need to defend Ukraine as much as what the pro-Ukrainian side or the Ukrainian propaganda like to portray. Of course, there are Ukrainians that are very fervent or very nationalistic, or they're really patriotic. Many of them have died in this war, because if they already have volunteered and go to war already. So that's the conundrum. But if you talk about the capacity, mental capacity, talk about whatever the perception that you have, they are both Slavic people. They are both Russian, ethnically Russian. They are the same people. So there is no such thing as the Russians are worse off in capacity to think and plan. So I drift off way too far. But the Ukrainians seems to have this perception. Maybe the propaganda played too much. They think that the Russians would withdraw. Instead, to my surprise as well, the Russians really doubled down, and they really overcommit a lot into the pontoon crossings and basically have enough forces to even launch their counteroffensive. So the Ukrainians now realizing that the Russians have basically go beyond what they expected. So they start their their Glushkovo offensive. Glushkovo is here, by the way. This is Glushkovo, and the Ukrainians attack towards Glushkovo in two different directions, and then put pressure on Tekino. But like I mentioned in multiple conclusions or SIBRAP ago, basically a long time ago, the window is closing and has now closed. This to attack now is a bit late. It's really a bit too late. This is a unfortunate situation. It's like you really should have attacked immediately after the bridges was first destroyed. Then it would be more consistent. Then you have that momentum, right? But they were waiting for the fall of Komarovka. This was what they were waiting for. They were waiting for the Ukrainians to break through Komarovka, break through Temwai, Otyabr, and Panasovka. And they're waiting for this to happen before they launch the offensive. And this never happened because the Russians started to defend really strongly in this area here. And now it just turned into some kind of military disaster. Of course, some are saying that the Ukrainians are now hitting into the rear of this counteroffensive. But I don't think they can get very far. That's the thing. That's what I think. But anyway, we shall continue to monitor and see how this develop. This is going to take some time. let's see how whether the Ukrainians can continue to hold on. The shelling reports, the latest shelling reports at Pelivka, Katerinivka, or Bodi, they seem to suggest that the Ukrainians still have reserve forces, so they are definitely going to try to do whatever they could, and I'm not sure if they can actually break through much from Tekino, because this is one of the major front lines, major defense lines the Russians have. So let's wait and see. In terms of the Russian plans, the Russian forces are really pushing is over towards Lyubimovka, Borovsky, and Darino, as well as Nikolaevo, Darino. This is the main direction of push. They are now pushing this area, and this is interesting because the Russian Defense Ministry, for the first time in their KURSK reports, actually talk about offensive actions. Usually they just say they inflicted losses, like for example something like this. They will write inflicted fire damage based on action of the troops with airstrike and artillery fire. This is usually what they write, and this time around they actually wrote offensive action. So they are basically, they are now acknowledging that they are on the offensive in the KURSK region, and they are still continuing to put pressure in various locations, and they are also attacking at Borki, by the way. So offensive actions. And Borki. So the attack at Borki is now officially an offensive in this area, while the Russians are also pushing in these directions. So these are the two main offensive places. The Russians are continuing to put pressure in multiple other locations as well, and the Ukrainians attack the KURSK offensive only left with Kamishevka, sorry, only at Kamishevka. This is the only one that was reported, and of course at Boroki, this is the only two. So the Ukrainian KURSK offensive is the original KURSK offensive is running out. It is tapering off, and they now have to start this new site over in the Klushkovo region to kind of keep it going. They are totally 6 pulling down, after 5 pulling down and 4 pulling down, though now they're 6 pulling down, and it is really not sure if it's really wise, as we are seeing the front line starting to collapse in multiple regions in the rest of Ukraine. So some of these major ones was the one at at this Krasnohorivka region, where the Russians launched a major offensive from Krasnohorivka, and they are at Hostre and moving towards Oleksandropil. So this is one major one that happened as the Ukrainians continue to spring down into KURSK and not really reinforcing the lines over in the rest of Ukraine. There are also some mainstream media highlighting this issue, is that the Ukrainians' KURSK offensive has denied resources needed to defend the rest of Ukraine. I mean, this kind of reports is starting to appear, so it's definitely not looking good. The Russians are also making progress towards Zolota Neva, as the Russians starting to push in the Prashestivka region. So this is also pretty significant per se, and so there is so much grounds being lost. So I mean, this is very depressing, I think, for the Ukrainians. What else do we have? The Pischany region also have some frontline change as the Russian forces have taken more grounds previously, as mentioned in the frontline changes report the day before towards Kuliavkivka. So this is also pretty significant. But Pischany is going to be a slow brew, so don't expect too much fast actions around here. I think it will be a slow brew. You will move very slowly. In terms of Pokrov, we haven't. So I just want to go back to Pokrov again. So the Pokrov offensive, we haven't seen the Russians really push in this direction for some time, as the Ukrainians started to do their counter-offensive actions around this area here. This latest one that I just mentioned just now in the frontline changes report is the first one in a long time where the Russians really are making progress again towards the Pokrov objective. Ukrainians are going to hold Lysivka as long as they can, because losing Lysivka will put Pokrov at risk, and the Russians would also may not necessarily attack Pokrov directly. So the Russians could actually take Lysivka, and they continue to hit west towards Shevchenko, so that they can attack in multiple directions in the future. And this is only the southern flank. Southern flank alone, I think, is not enough for the Russians. So the Russians will definitely still go for the Minograd region. And Minograd will be much more difficult because it's a big city, is as big as Pokrov itself. So that will take some time. So the Pokrov offensive is definitely going to go on for some time. It's not going to be finishing so soon. At least another 2-3 months of war in this region here. And with the Ukrainians putting more effort into this area, so that is going to take some time. This salient here somehow is still on the map. Let me check the deep state again. Yeah, I just double checked. The Ukrainian mapping still continue to map in this way. So the Russians, at least based on the sources, still have not closed up entirely yet. But this is eventually going to happen. The Ukrainians, I mentioned that they need to escape this region, but it seems like they decided to stay here, as the Ukrainian forces now trying to hold a position that Ukraine. They are fighting over there. They are defending Zelane Perche. It seems like they are going against what I think they should be doing. So looks like they really want to stand the ground and fight. So yeah, kudos to them. But now this is happening. This is bad. Like, this is bad. So yeah, we shall see how this develops. Like, if the Russians start to fight at Kuratkivka, this is just as bad as the Russians fighting at Khernik. It's just as bad. And if both are engaged at the same time, then there is no escape for the Ukrainian forces over in this encirclement or possible encirclement. So this is just some bad things waiting to happen. Yeah, so anyway, I can't remember what else I want to talk about. Okay, yeah, one more. At the New York region, the situation remains largely the same. There is still a slow grind over at Thorax. The Ukrainians actually sent in reinforcement, and they sent in the Azov. So looks like they are really wanting to do whatever they could to hold this position. Azov is one of the more well-armed, better trained troops, because they hold the name of Azov. So this brigade is more cherished, by the Ukrainian military, and they are used to plug the hole for a lot of the most important front lines. And for them to be deployed towards Nelipivka in the New York region just shows the Ukrainians are putting more emphasis on the defense of the New York front. So we shall see. Generally speaking, I mentioned before, I don't really think New York front is really that important. I think it's a very unimportant front line. Somehow the Russians still push through. And of course, it does give the Russians a lot of PR wins. But strategically, I don't think it's that important. So yeah, the Russians can do whatever they want. It's not my war. So anyway, we shall see how this goes. I still think that Pokrov is still the most significant thing, most important objective. And that would just make Ukrainian logistics way more complicated. And just one last note is that Russians taking Pokrov doesn't mean that the Russians wants to conquer the entire ground immediately. It only extends logistic for the Ukrainians, and I think that is the prime objective of the Russians. Is not the objective conquest of the Donetsk and the Luhansk region. I think the conquest of the region is a given if they are able to grind down the Ukrainian troops, which is what Putin wants. Putin objectively, literally says that he wants to destroy the military of the Ukrainians, the ability to fight at all. So if the only way is to stretch their logistic, make it so expensive and painful to fight in such a long front line, because if the front line reach all the way to Pokrov, the front line just extends by a lot, by yet another 60 kilometers. So I think this is something that the Russians are just planning to do. I don't think Pokrov would necessarily mean the collapse of the entire Donetsk region. Donetsk is still really, really big. The Ukrainian held Donetsk is still really, really big. I think this is just what I think the Russians are currently planning. This war is likely to continue for some time if the Ukrainians don't give up. So Ukraine is a huge country. It's a huge country. It's not some tiny country. So don't underestimate Ukraine, but Ukraine is definitely facing a lot of serious issues right now. So anyway, thank you for watching. Do press the like button, subscribe, and yeah, sorry for whatever, and I'll see you guys in the next update.